Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about the goings on in week 3 of the Ramesh Sunny Balwani Theranos trial. And as a reminder, Balwani is in court accused of multiple counts of fraud against doctors, patients and investors in connection with his role as COO and President of Theranos alongside his co-conspirator Elizabeth Holmes. Their trials are being held separately and Holmes has already been found guilty on 4 counts of fraud in her case. Well, this week we already had a juror drop out. Apparently they called in sick on Monday and they were replaced with an alternate, so we now have 12 jurors and 5 alternates left. Just before we get started on the actual trial, there was the motion to dismiss that was entered last week, and before the judge delayed the trial until this week, and if you remember there'd been a COVID scare at court. Now unfortunately we didn't get to hear that, it was postponed until the 29th of March, and there still isn't any information about this, although the sentence here from the agreement to postpone ... relation to Mr. Balwani's motion for dismissal or other remedies. Well, what is the motion and what are these other remedies? I don't know, and we'll just have to wait and see. Well, although Elizabeth had already been found guilty in her trial, as Balwani's former romantic and business partner, she did loom large over this week's events. So after a couple of weeks, including the jury selection and the delays caused by the COVID, we did get to the opening statements. As an overview, in the opening statements we had Balwani depicted as an instrumental accomplice in a conspiracy that enabled them both, i.e. that's both him and Elizabeth Holmes, to pull off a huge scam in relation to the Theranos blood testing tech. Balwani's team in response countered and they portrayed him as a savvy, well-meaning, an executive who poured millions of his own dollars into Theranos because he fervently believed in the Silicon Valley company and its ability to revolutionise healthcare. And it is clear that Holmes is going to be a prominent figure during the trial. Robert Leach for the prosecution gave his opening statement. It lasted about 50 minutes and Holmes' picture appeared on screens around the courtroom repeatedly. You will see how they were partners in everything, including their crimes, Leach said. Stephen Cesaris, whose opening arguments for the defence were approximately 90 minutes, also made multiple references to Holmes during his presentation. But really this was to portray Balwani as a sort of hero in that he stepped in to join Theranos when it desperately needed cash and left it in a far better shape when he left in 2016. Cesaris said Balwani put up $10 million of his own money to guarantee a loan for Theranos before investing another $5 million in cash to buy a stake in the company. That stake would eventually at one point become worth $500 million on paper. Sunny believed in Theranos, its technology and its mission, said Cesaris. In 2010, Balwani became Theranos Chief Operating Officer, a job he held until 2016 when he did leave, and that was at the point where there were revelations about serious flaws in Theranos technology, and Theranos had boasted at the time it could scan for hundreds of potential health problems with just a few drops of blood. These were audacious and ultimately bogus claims and helped Theranos raise nearly $1 billion and strike lucrative deals with Walgreens and Safeway before it all unravelled and the company collapsed. There was quite a difference in the prosecution and defence's take on Balwani's capability. Cesaris told the jury Balwani had gotten the job at Theranos because of his past successes, whereas Leach portrayed him as unqualified to be overseeing a company attempting to develop a medical device. What he did have is a connection to Elizabeth Holmes, Leach said. Leach also alluded to the text messages between Balwani and Holmes, which are likely to be brought into court during trial, and we will likely see many of the same witnesses that we saw in the Holmes trial. I was surprised, but I guess it's a sensible tactic for the defence when Cesaris raised the spectre of the abuse claims that Holmes had made against Balwani during her trial. Cesaris urged jury members in the current trial to discard anything they may have recalled reading or hearing about them. The headlines and sensational stories about Elizabeth Holmes have no place in this trial, said Cesaris. One interesting point, we don't know yet if Holmes will be brought in as a witness against Balwani because she may do so in an attempt to gain a recommendation of leniency in her own sentencing. However, most pundits that have commentated consider it's going to be a remote possibility. It'll be interesting if it does happen, that's for sure. So that was an overview to give a flavour, and just to give you the brief outline of the specifics on the opening arguments, let's go through them in a little more detail, prosecution followed by the defence. So Robert Leach was up for the prosecution. He talked about the fact that the Edison devices, they're the ones that were actually developed by Theranos to do testing, and he said they could only ever do 12 blood tests, and at the end, most testing was being done on third-party devices anyway. He talked about the fact that Holmes told investors about military deals and big pharma deals, but the military projects never got off the ground. Now, Balwani told investors in October 2014 that Theranos would have about $140 million in sales that year, but actually only had $150,000. In 2015, he predicted $2 billion of sales, but only had $2 million. Balwani was the primary contact for the Walgreens contract, and he lied to investors about the amount of venous draws being taken there. At one point, Balwani owned 28 million shares, and these had a value of over $500 million. Leach will call Erica Chung and Adam Rosendorf, who will testify about the problems in the labs and patients who had bogus pregnancy tests. We also will have the cringy texts again, primarily to demonstrate just how much Balwani and Holmes were communicating, and how investors didn't know they were dating. Balwani and Holmes were partners in crime, he said. You will see how they were partners in everything, including their crime. All of the other investors we'll see have already been in the Holmes trial, and Leach listed them off. Just as an observation here, during the whole time Balwani was taking prolific notes in juxtaposition to Holmes, who never really took notes, nor ever really moved much during her trial for that matter. So Stephen Cesaris from Oric then spoke for the defence, and very quickly he said Balwani did not start Theranos. Balwani did not control Theranos. When he left, there were hundreds of millions of dollars in the Theranos accounts. He put at least $5 million of cash in himself and never took a dollar. And we get to the database, which you'll remember was effectively lost due to the loss of the encryption keys. Well, the government never analysed those records, which would have been needed to prove that Theranos devices didn't work. We'll come back to those in a bit. Balwani worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make it happen. He never made a dime from Theranos. A little bit of family background here. Apparently Balwani's 3 brothers are in court watching. He also has 2 sisters and grew up in a family of business people. He did his degree in information systems, then moved to Silicon Valley and startups, working for Microsoft for a while, and then started a company, which he later sold and became a US citizen. He met Holmes while he was studying for an MBA and in China doing a language course, and started dating her in around 2004. Holmes built Theranos, not Balwani. Elizabeth, not Sunny. This was hers. This is what she built, he said. In what seems a key point, he stressed that Holmes had already attracted high-profile investors and cut pharma deals before Sunny had anything to do with Theranos. Now, he joined Theranos as he believed in the company's tech, and he lent as much as $18 million to Theranos in 2009 to help it pay its bills, and the company eventually paid him back that money. He learned about the tech from the Theranos scientists, and Ian Gibbons told him that the tech could do all 4 categories of blood testing. Now, although the company developed 76 patents and more than 200 sample tests and validated approximately 70 or more of them, Balwani and Holmes didn't validate those tests. The Theranos scientists did, and the lab director did. There is no dispute that Theranos used modified commercial testing devices, but this was never hidden and actually disclosed on its website. And it also disclosed on its website that it used venous draws for some tests. We heard that Walgreens told him that they were planning to roll out Theranos devices in 2,000 stores nationwide, and that's what he told investors, including the DeVos family. Sunny believed Walgreens, and so he told investors what Walgreens told him. Now, Adam Rosendorf went to reporters instead of federal inspectors to complain about the tech, and Balwani was forced to get temporary lab directors due to state approval delays. It was the government's fault that the database wasn't unlocked, as they didn't get the key to unlock it until it was too late. The database would show that the tests were accurate. Well, it would say that anyway, but this did cause a problem. Here, the prosecutor interrupted Balwani's attorney, and Judge De Villa said this is opening statements and not closing arguments, and to wrap it up, which he did, but the jury was sent away at this point. And in the meantime, while the jury was away, the attorneys argued about what should be relevant in respect of the missing database. Balwani's attorney agrees that they opened the door on the topic, and the judge essentially said he'd review the transcript to decide what would be relevant. He said, in quotes, "Sometimes even a small door can open to a wide pasture." Now, just so that you understand what was going on here, essentially Balwani's camp want to make the point that the individual instances of the Theranos tests being wrong are wholly misrepresentative, because these should be viewed amongst the millions of tests that the company did that were highly accurate, and a review of the numbers in total would demonstrate this. There is no way to prove this now with the database being lost, and Balwani's team at one point were alluding to the fact that this may have been done deliberately to thwart the defence, although these are my words, they didn't put it that directly. The judge has ruled in the past essentially there could be no question of putting blame on the prosecution, dragging their feet, deliberately hiding things, etc., etc., and this couldn't be alluded to in court. Well, what does this opening the door mean? The judge certainly considers this to be very serious. So what would the prosecution make of this if testimony about the database were allowed? It's not clear, but perhaps they have evidence to throw the blame back at Balwani. There might be something damning that Balwani's team did that he will now have to handle in court. We'll have to await the judge's ruling on this one. And that concluded the opening arguments. So the jury were ushered back in and we had our first witness. And as a reminder, this was the first for the prosecution, who always go first with their witnesses. Just as a point on these witnesses and throughout the trial, I went through a lot of detail on each and every exchange that the witnesses had on the witness stand. So I'll probably just give an overview, unless we have a new witness or a new point of view, of course, in which case I'll discuss it. So I'll give the overview and the gist of the prosecution and defence approach. Erica Chung. If you remember, she was one of the whistleblowers who talked to the Wall Street Journal, which actually then started the whole unravelling of the company. She quit after about 6 months because she was expressing concern about the practices and the lab being run at Theranos at the time. It was a similar sort of examination that we had for the Holmes trial, and the key elements of that were apparently she started in R&D and then was moved to the Clear Lab, and the defence asked her if she was unhappy with that. She said that she thought she was upset for a short period of time, but moved on. Did she sign a non-disclosure agreement? Well, yes, she did. Now, if any of the IP, that's intellectual property, was discussed, how reliable is she if she went ahead and did just that? In other words, discuss the IP after signing the non-disclosure agreement. SOPs were discussed. Now, these are standard operating procedures, and you might remember Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani were concerned if the lab techs were getting it all wrong, and that the tech itself was actually reliable. Did Erica Chung modify any of the third-party devices or validate them? No, she didn't. So she's not going to be able to provide any evidence on that. In other words, the defence is limiting what the jury can consider when it comes to Erica. Now, Chung has stated how she was approached in her company car park, where she went to work after leaving Theranos, late at night by someone who had been sitting there all day to be provided by a legal threat of a lawsuit if she breached her non-disclosure agreement. In her words, this scared her and rattled her sense of personal safety. And that's the phrase she used in the Holmes trial. And you can get a sense here that the prosecution is implying to the jury that if there were no problems in the company, why did it need to go to such lengths to silence people? The cross-examination will continue next week, but apparently one of the jurors has a wedding to go to, so there'll be no Friday testimony this week, I believe. So we'll expect the cross-examination part of the trial to continue mid to late next week. Now, we still have the motion to dismiss scheduled for Tuesday. Well, I hope that update's been informative. Please subscribe to the channel. If you hit the notification bell, then you won't miss out on further videos either in this series or any others on my channel. Bye for now.